improv is basically just the most disrespected art form maybe ever. That might be going too far. Have you ever noticed how there is a total absence of great improv artists, as at least in terms of how we perceive them? It doesn't mean there's no one who's good at improv, and there are some artists like Robin Williams and Will Ferrell who are known for being very good at improv. But like when you look at the canon of great comedians in our modern culture, there are constantly comics who are being thought of as prophetic. Currently, I think Dave Chappelle is getting that treatment. Historically, there have been people like Lenny Bruce and George Carlin. Who is on that level with an improv? The closest that anyone has ever gotten is probably Robin Williams, and I will talk about him a bunch later in this video. But overall, there is a strange level of disrespect that improv gets as a comedic form. And there are actually very specific reasons for that. Whether you know it or not, there is this silent agreement that our society has about what great art truly is. And improv literally cannot meet the requirements we have set out for great art. The three requirements, as I'm going to define them, are a little complicated, but I'll give you the summary. It is that art needs to be totally final. It needs to be a complete work. It needs to be repeatable, as in it can't be a one-hit wonder. And it needs to have mechanical transparency. And that's the hardest one to explain, and I will work my way up to it. I'm not burying the lead here. I just need to start with other stuff. I'm going to dive into the first section of this definition of what great art needs to be by talking about the way in which it needs to be final. There's a way in which we love dead artists. I most recently noticed this with Norm Macdonald. And actually, in the comments section on one of my YouTube videos about Norm, I noticed people saying that Norm is suddenly considered a GOAT right after he dies. And there was a way in which I think they were implying that people are sentimental, and that's the only reason that artists suddenly get this bump right after they die, is people sort of think of them fondly once they're gone. I think the more complex and interesting reason that happens is because once an artist is dead, their entire body of work is like frozen in time. They are Leninized. They're frozen in carbonite, whatever you want to view it as. They can no longer ruin their own legacy. I think as soon as an artist like Norm Macdonald dies, we are able to effectively look at his entire body of work and make more definitive statements about his work and whether or not he was great. And I think really it feeds people's egos to say that an artist is great. People, more than anything, I think are scared of being wrong. I think people are scared that if they give a really good review to an artist and maybe even call them like the GOAT, that artist will then make something terrible and make you feel dumb for loving them. The more frequently and consistently someone creates great art, the more comfortable people are calling them a GOAT. And once they're dead, it's totally safe and you won't get made to look a fool. I think people underestimate how easy it is to ruin a legacy. And one of my favorite examples of that is The Hangover. Obviously, the first Hangover movie was like hugely impactful. And there's a joke in Between Two Ferns where Jerry Seinfeld asks Zach Galifianakis, do you think that if you hadn't made Hangover 2 and 3, the original would be considered a classic?
Do you think if they only made one Hangover and didn't make the other two, it would be considered a comedy classic? Do you think that you destroyed what would have been a comedy classic by the cash grab of 2 and 3?
Let me ask you a question. Do you have relatives that...
And as much as this is definitely a joke and probably written by Zach Galifianakis, I think it's 100% true. I think The Hangover was so big when it came out that we would look back at it as like on par with something like Superbad, maybe even more significant, if they hadn't pumped out those really just meh sequels right afterwards. People need time to digest a piece of art and decide that it is truly great, and we weren't given that time after The Hangover. The point is that once an artist dies, they can't make a Hangover 2 and 3. And more importantly, returning to improv, there is absolutely no sense of this frozen work. it is so difficult to look at the body of work of an improv artist. I think it was only briefly possible for someone like Robin Williams to be considered like a great artist during the period of digital monoculture, which is a very unique moment in our history in terms of technology, because it was advanced enough that we had these like interview shows where celebrities could talk about their art form and kind of hype themselves up, but not far enough into the future where we are now, where everything's super subdivided and it's much harder to create singular cultural icons in the same way that Robin Williams or like Prince or whoever was back then. Not that those two are on the same level, but the point is that it was easier to have massive cultural icons just before the current era of the internet. I think the most definitive proof of how important this isolation of a body of work is if you look at the difference between a screenwriter and a playwright. It's a really fascinating difference in how they are treated, because people who write plays, playwrights, are considered huge. They're very important. Shakespeare, obviously, is like the great writer of all time. Screenwriters don't get any respect whatsoever. It's almost a joke. Hollywood studios will buy a screenplay, sit on it for 20 years, chop it up, completely rewrite it, change the title, and then throw the original writer's name in like the third section of the credits. And none of their original work is even still there anymore. And you could say that this is just, ooh, Hollywood is evil, money, blah, blah, blah. But I think the more real answer in my mind is the fact that movies are frozen in time once they are released as a movie, whereas plays are frozen in time while they are a play written down. Each individual performance of a play will have slight variations. It's not really a definitive work when it is performed live. It's a definitive work when it is written down on paper. And humans want that sense of definitiveness when they review and decide what is great art. There's a really interesting interview with Robin Williams. It's from Inside the Actors Studio, where James Lipton asks Robin Williams, does your brain just think faster than ours? The way in which I think people like to mystify great artists, that goes twice as much for comedians and thrice as much for improv comedians. People don't understand how improv works. And I include I don't really get how improv works. I suck at improv. I'm a stand-up comedian, and I think it's fundamentally different in terms of comedic structure. That's a whole other topic, though. But people love to mystify great art. And in this moment, I think James Lipton is totally mystifying Robin Williams' talent. Sure, there is a genetic brain quality to what makes him funny, but I think you're denying him the right to prove that he has process. And this is what I meant by mechanically transparent. People want great art to be explainable. If you can't explain why art is great, it oftentimes will fall short of our measures. Like if you just have fun watching an action movie, but there isn't like a thing you can say about what was good about it, it will never be treated with respect. And I think by simultaneously throwing Robin Williams the respect of being like, wow, you're so special, but also denying him the right to have a sort of mechanical process to his comedy, you're keeping him in this limbo of a uniquely talented individual within an art form that kind of doesn't deserve respect. That's not me saying that. I think that's the implication of this interview. Something I've noticed is that amateur improv shows sell way more tickets than amateur stand-up comedy shows, which you might think is a good thing. I'm going to argue why that's actually disrespectful, because higher level improv shows do not sell anywhere near as many tickets as like famous comedians, stand-up comedians do. I think the reason that amateur improv sells so many more tickets is because people don't respect it as an art form. They think anyone can do it, and so they think amateur improv will probably be fine. Whereas they think stand-up comedy requires great art, so an amateur stand-up comedian probably sucks. I think that is the underlying psychology of it. There is also, I will acknowledge, an element of amateur stand-up comedy that can be very cringe, but I do think there is a stronger element of people just feeling safe going to a low-level improv show because they view improv as the same as just joking around with your friends. It's just like being funny in the moment, when in reality, it requires very specific skill sets. And just like stand-up comedy, it has so much more structure than you would assume it does from the outside. I'm not an expert in improv. Stand-up is my wheelhouse. But if you're curious about that, you should know that every improv comedy show is built around very specific narrative structures. They have terms for each of the categories of improv. There's like the Armando and other ones that might be on screen at this moment. Improv is structural. It's improvised in that each moment and joke is made up, but improv troupes are constantly rehearsing and practicing. They wouldn't do that if it was something you could truly just stumble your way into. And I think this leads into the final and sort of hidden most important thing that great art needs to receive respect, which is that it needs to be kind of singular. I think this might actually be maybe a bigger issue than everything else, is that people love individual great artists. I'll go back to Hollywood films to point out that directors of films get so much credit for making a great film. The cinematographer, the screenwriter, the gaffer, it's such a team effort, and everyone knows that directors get more credit than they deserve, even if they are talented people. Improv comedy is a group sport. It's really hard to have that shining individual star on an improv stage, even if you have funny individual moments. In order to know that an individual improv performer is truly great, you would have to go and watch them like 7 nights in a row and watch them perform with several different groups of people to know that it is them who is uniquely talented and not just the group or some other factor or luck or whatever. And no one's going to do that ever. The closest that improv gets to receiving the great artist treatment is when improv institutions like Second City or Whose Line Is It Anyway slowly get recognized as a great improv organization. People start to talk about them as having, an eye for great talent. In particular, I think it's interesting how Whose Line Is It Anyway was basically the same exact cast for, however many years. And the members of that group, Wayne Brady, Colin Mockery, and other humans, whatever. The fact that I don't know their name really shows I'm part of the problem too. But the fact that people don't really know their names, but a lot of people know the show Whose Line Is It Anyway, really reinforces how disrespectful we are towards improv comedians. It's not like that was a show with a rotating cast where you never knew who was going to be on each week. It's not even like SNL where people were there for a couple years and get replaced. It's like the same guys the whole time. They really deserve individual respect more than they get. The point is that there's an underlying issue that I think all comedy has, and this maybe relates more back to stand-up comedy, and that is that good comedy should be invisible. If you can see the mechanics of a joke happening, you're actually not going to enjoy it. And so there is a way in which really, really good comedy will never be truly appreciated. On top of that, I think there is a lack of academic study of comedy. I think in order to get appreciated as an art form, there needs to be like professors who analyze a thing and talk about the canon of its history and all that. That's what makes an art form great, is professors, weirdly enough. I really hate that about art in general, that like art historians are really such a necessary part of the process. And who cares if art is great or not? Like ultimately, the only reason I care at all about what is great art is because it directly leads to artists being able to make a living. It is harder to make a living as an improv comedian than anything else. I say that as a stand-up comedian who is not really making a living. I am glad I enjoy stand-up comedy as a performance art for myself more than improv, because I personally know really talented improv comedians who switch to stand-up because somehow that is even still making more money than improv. That's how bad it is out there for them. I think the more we analyze and reveal the mechanics of improv comedy and the ways in which it is very difficult, the more respect it will receive and the easier it will be for improv comedians to make a living. So I guess what I'm saying is the best thing you can do if you truly love improv comedy is, first of all, obviously go out and watch it. Live performers need your support now more than ever. But also talk about it. Talk about what worked, what didn't work. Talk about the mechanics of it. Don't just say that was incredible and he was a genius and his brain works faster than other people's. That's a cop-out. Dig into the mechanics of what is great about improv comedy and all comedy, and you will be doing it a favor. That's all I've got to say. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope it changed your perspective on some stuff. Either way, I hope you enjoyed this one. Hit the subscribe if you did. Have a great day.